But the Krajina Serb refugees in this convoy were attacked by Croatian warplanes, even so. 5 of them killed, 15 wounded. The Croats claim they did it because they say the refugees had been helping to smuggle out heavy weapons, but the UN are demanding a full investigation. Other refugees, tens of thousands of them, have now made it, though, to the Bosnian Serb town of Banja Luka, where the aid agencies are struggling to cope with this sudden and enormous influx of human beings. Some are frail and old, others have just come into the world. This newborn baby has begun his life as a refugee. The exodus is on such a scale that roads from west to east are completely clogged, as if there were one huge traffic jam across the former Yugoslavia. Many are heading across this bridge into Serbia, which, because it's still suffering international sanctions, will hardly welcome them with open arms. How many people altogether do you think will come into your country?
Who knows exactly that? This is the big tragedy, but we expect a very big number. I think more than 50,000-60,000 of total number of refugees will come in the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia.
After the lightning Croatian attack on Krajina, it has been emptied of virtually its entire population. Most of these refugees have been on the road now for 3, 4, even 5 days. They're hot, exhausted and extremely thirsty. They brought next to nothing with them. They say they simply didn't have time. They're just glad to have escaped with their lives. But some, like this 3-month-old baby, have fallen ill under the scorching sun on this marathon journey. The child's mother told me she's desperate to find a doctor. She said she's been travelling ever since last Saturday, when the Croats closed in on her hometown. Another woman called Mira said she fled from Petrinja in northern Krajina on Friday. She has no relatives in Serbia, and she says she has no idea where she'll go now. Rada Koralia points to the back of a truck she's been travelling in. This is my house now, she told us, but I don't care. I'll move into a Croat's or a Muslim's home. Then they can go where I used to live, she says. I'll even give them my old address. Many refugees scour lists for news of their missing sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers. Some have become separated from each other, some are dead. Mingling among the refugees are Krajina Serb troops, defeated, demoralized and dejected. These men at least, though, are in no mood to fight for the Bosnian Serbs, as some have speculated they might. 2 soldiers told me they blame the Serbian leader Slobodan Milosevic for failing to stop the Croats capturing Krajina. He sacrificed us, they said, for some wider interests of his own. It was shameful. Another Serb soldier we met today said he, his wife and his children fled 5 minutes after the Croats started shelling the Krajina capital, Knin. I didn't mind being killed, Javica Maricic told me, but I didn't want my kids to be slaughtered. You can see I left without even the shirt on my back. We're going anywhere, said his wife, just anywhere we won't be killed. Relief workers have described this exodus as an emerging calamity. The refugees are Serbs, so they know they're unlikely to get that much international sympathy. Even so, they have lost their homes, their livelihoods, and often their loved ones. In the Balkans, it seems, there is an inexhaustible supply of suffering. Ben Brown, BBC News, with the Krajina Serbs in Bosnia.
The United Nations has admitted tonight that there are still thousands of refugees trapped by Croat troops and unable to join the exodus across northern Bosnia. More than 30,000 are surrounded in the town of Topusko, and a further 15,000 in Dvor have been under fire since midday. But the biggest fear is that the conflict may now spread to the region of eastern Slavonia, the last remaining area in Croatia held by rebel Serbs who captured it in 1991. Croatian tanks are reported to be on their way to the region, and Serbian army tanks have also moved closer to the border.
It's Croatian soldiers who call the shots now, and tens of thousands of Serb refugees are still trapped in the north of Krajina. desperate to get out, but no amount of negotiations by the UN has facilitated any safe passage. Convoys leave empty from the town of Topushko. The same happened in Davor, with refugees caught in between shelling and artillery, which has gone on all day.
We are extremely worried because we've not been able to get aid through. The Croatians have been blocking our access into this area. There will be a need soon. These people are exhausted, they're tired, they're dehydrated and they're traumatized, and we must have international access as soon as possible. Without that, a serious and large humanitarian crisis is looming.
With only those pockets of resistance left in Krajina, a gung-ho Croatian army is already turning its attention elsewhere. Troops, including these crack units, are reported to be building up in eastern Slavonia, the only major area left in Croatia held by rebel Serbs. The Croatian defence minister has made it clear it's territory taken from them in 1991, and they want it back.
The territory is still occupied. Croatia will not give it up. Croatia will liberate it through force, if not through negotiations.
Domestically popular it certainly would be, but the Croatian leadership know that a move on eastern Slavonia would be a huge military gamble, and a gamble which could go badly wrong. Croatian towns on the fringes of eastern Slavonia expect fighting, are preparing for it, and so it seems are the Serbs. They've sent tanks to their border with eastern Slavonia, and it's almost certain they won't sit and watch the area fall without helping like Krajina. It's all a cocktail for more conflict. Matthew Amreliwala, BBC News, Zagreb.
And I'm joined now from Sarajevo by our correspondent Martin Bell. Martin, how do you read the situation over eastern Slavonia? Flashpoint or sabre rattling?
One moving into another. It had always been assumed that the Croats would go after their lost territories to try to liberate them one at a time. First in May, now here, and maybe before the UN mandate expired in November in eastern Slavonia. But they may feel emboldened by their lightning success in and around Knin to go for Vukovar, which is terribly important to them. It's this river town flattened in fighting 4 years ago. But that would bring them into direct conflict with the Serbs, which so far they have managed to avoid. So the stakes and the risks are extraordinarily high tonight.
Do you have the feeling they might just call Serbia's bluff?
It would be extremely dangerous to do so. It would be more prudent to think that this were just sabre rattling. There is a strong refugee constituency inside Croatia animating the Croatian government and pressing it to act. But it would be much more prudent to hold off for a while because the casualties would be terrible, and Vukovar, after what happened 4 years ago, is still not much more than a pile of rubble.
Now, the Americans believe that the downfall of Krajina means that we're entering a new opportunity area for peace in the region. Do you believe that, or do you think it's just a new stage in the conflict?
I wish I believed that. I don't think so. Here in Bosnia, we know that the Bosnian army is now going to be reinforced by thousands, even tens of thousands of Krajina Serbs who fled here and will be gathering for further action. One thing the Serbs do not do when defeated is wait for further bad things to happen to them. They initiate counteraction.
Do you detect no sign of war weariness?
A lot of war weariness among the Serbs. There's no doubt about it at all. The Serbs in the trenches are extremely war weary. This is not reflected in their politicians or even necessarily in their generals. And it is the generals and politicians who have overridden the war weariness of the people almost for more than 3 years now.
Martin Bell in Sarajevo, thank you very much. Here, Labour has suspended its local district party in Walsall in the West Midlands amid Conservative claims that the so-called loony left was still in existence on Labour-run councils. The suspension followed reports of intimidation at party meetings and claims that Labour Party rules have been broken. But Labour said the activities of the district party didn't reflect on how Walsall Council or other Labour authorities were run.
Can I give you a leaflet? You might have read about this in the news. We're being sacked by a Labour council.
The sacking of 36 community services staff, the forced redundancy of 9 senior executive officers and the possible sell-off of the Civic Centre are among the sweeping measures introduced since Labour regained control of Walsall in May. Council workers are to be balloted tomorrow on whether to take industrial action over the changes.
The trade unions are obliged to take all the action that they have to take in order to defend our members' jobs. And it is quite disgraceful that we're having to defend our members' jobs against a Labour Party which is sacking those people.
When Labour last ran the council in the early 80s, it was dubbed the People's Republic of Walsall. The local MP wrote last month to the Labour leader, expressing his fear that the new administration was in danger of reviving that tag.
What's causing most concern is the proposal to devolve power from the council here at the town hall to 54 locally elected neighbourhood committees. Critics feel they've become like Soviet-style people's committees. While the Labour leadership admits that this does little to enhance Labour's new image, the official reason for the suspensions is alleged intimidation at local party meetings and a failure to comply with national party rules.
Labour officials say the leaders of Walsall, who attended a meeting of local government officers last month, were warned then to temper their behaviour, but they now claim the suspension took them by surprise.
We have complied fully with all the requests that have been made to us. In terms of the way that we handle issues, and yet this is coming as a complete bolt out of the blue, that we find that the Labour Party in Walsall has been suspended because the chairman of the Conservative Party is in Walsall today. They must be rubbing their hands with glee at this news.
And it seems they are. The Tory chairman, touring a Walsall maternity hospital as part of a two-day visit to the West Midlands, was quick to make capital, claiming the loony left was alive and well.
New Labour tried to persuade us that it had all gone. Real Labour in Walsall are demonstrating that nothing really has changed.
Labour's environment spokesman was launching a new council initiative in Reading today, a new hotline encouraging people to report suspected benefit fraud. He said Walsall's problems were in stark contrast to the good work being done in the vast majority of Labour councils.
If people from Walsall and Labour Party people from Walsall are saying to us that they're concerned about what's going on, we investigate and take action. And if it's embarrassing while we're taking action, we've got to accept it. The alternative would be to do nothing.
Events in Walsall follow the suspension of 4 other Labour councils in Birmingham earlier this year. While Tony Blair's eager to show he'll stamp out anything that can be perceived as loony left, the Tories continue to see local government as a fertile ground for attack in the run-up to the election. Carolyn Quinn, BBC News, Walsall.
Barclays Bank has rejected criticism of a scheme to recruit sixth formers to carry out clerical work, saying it's designed just as work experience. But Barclays' staff union claims the plan amounts to exploitation at a time when the future of many full-time jobs in banking is in doubt.
It was the Barclays branch here at Slough in Berkshire which asked local schools whether they would be interested in a work experience scheme for their pupils. 5 schools responded. The plan is that around 30 A-level students will work 2-hour shifts in the evenings during term time, doing bookkeeping and cashier work. They'll be paid about £4 an hour. Barclays described the scheme as a very positive move.
These are essentially training posts where we can offer work experience to teenagers so that they just get an idea of what work is about. Of course, we want to interest them in banking as well, because we will be recruiting school leavers at some point in the future. So there is something in it for us as well.
But the unions at Barclays have been protesting for some time about job losses at the bank. 18,000 jobs have gone in the past 4 years, with a further 3,000 to go by the end of this year. The unions fear that school children will now be used as cheap labour.
The bank is alleging that this is work experience. It is not work experience. It is exploiting young people to staff branches late in the afternoons when Barclays simply doesn't have enough of its own staff to provide a quality service, and that is wrong.
Berkshire County Council favours the Barclays scheme in principle.
We certainly would support the idea of young people having work experience, and this happens right throughout, as I said, the whole range of industry. But what we wouldn't condone is if they are being employed at the expense of employees that normally have positions in the bank.
Barclays, which today reported half-year profits of more than £1 billion, sees nothing wrong in giving part-time work to teenagers who are still at school. But to the unions, it's the thin end of the wedge. Greg Wood, BBC News.
New Zealand is going to the International Court of Justice to challenge France's decision to resume nuclear testing in the South Pacific. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jim Bolger acknowledged the legal case was not strong, but said he was determined to dissuade France from its proposed round of tests at Mururoa Atoll. The boyfriend of the Danish tour guide beaten to death in Cyprus last year has given evidence in court. Michalis Basiliades wept as he described the events leading to his girlfriend's death. 3 British soldiers have pleaded not guilty to manslaughter, abduction and conspiracy to rape. French train drivers have called for a 4-day strike on Eurostar services between London and Paris. The action is scheduled to begin at midnight tomorrow. French railways say it's too early to say how seriously services will be hit. Palestinian negotiators said tonight they'd reached agreement with Israel on the redeployment of Israeli troops on the West Bank. The breakthrough came during talks between the Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres and the PLO leader Yasser Arafat in the Egyptian resort of Taba.
Yasser Arafat returned to Taba as news emerged that he and the Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres had reached agreement on a timetable for the withdrawal of Israeli troops from the West Bank. The two men have just begun their second meeting in as many days, aimed at forcing the pace of the peace process and resolving differences negotiators haven't been able to reach agreement on. They've now agreed Israeli troops will withdraw from the West Bank not in 3 monthly stages, as the Palestinians wanted, but at 6 monthly intervals. Some will leave before Palestinian elections, others afterwards. But until it's announced when those elections will take place and where the troops will withdraw from first, the significance of today's breakthrough won't be known. Meanwhile, there have again been clashes between Jewish settlers opposed to the peace talks and Israeli security forces. The settlers, intent on intensifying their demonstrations against the negotiations, blocked main roads in Israel and the West Bank during the rush hour. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News, Jerusalem.
The Ministry of Defence is seeking a new buyer for its fleet of Upholder submarines, but any deal will cost the taxpayer hundreds of millions of pounds. A sale to Canada appears to have collapsed, but Chile and Portugal are said to be interested in the vessels.
The 4 Upholder-class submarines were intended for the icy waters of the North Atlantic, their diesel engines quiet enough to patrol without being detected by the Russians. They were ordered when the Cold War was at its height. By the time they came off the production line, 3 years late, after numerous mechanical problems, the Soviet Union had collapsed and they were no longer needed. For the last 2 years, they've been sitting in the VSEL shipyard in Barrow-in-Furness, slowly deteriorating.
They have been used very, very little. They've been in service for about 4 years, but the world political climate changed in that time and they have decided to set them aside. So they're practically 0 mileage submarines sitting there in preservation waiting for a customer.
As the government's having to pay to keep them in mothballs, it's now very keen to get rid of them. Several countries, including Canada, Chile and Portugal, have shown an interest, but so far no one has made an offer. These submarines are believed to have cost close to £1 billion to build, all but a fraction of which the Ministry of Defence will now have to write off. A costly and embarrassing failure, even if it is the price you pay for peace. Tom Carver, BBC News, Whitehall.
Prison reform campaigners have called for prisoners, while they're serving their sentences, to be given more opportunities to work for outside companies. But there's concern that prisons could become a source of cheap labour.
Early this morning and an 8-hour shift begins at a plastics, recycling and moulding workshop in Surrey. It's no ordinary workshop, it's inside Latchmere House Prison and the workers are the inmates. The jail has a contract to produce plant containers and buckets for a local firm. It pays the prisoners £2 an hour and gives them some real work experience.
This is more like a proper job, working outside. So if I was supposed to get a job outside, I'll be used to it because I'm used to it from in here.
Senior staff here are enthusiastic and support calls by the Prison Reform Trust for more outside involvement.
We have a situation here where prisoners are waiting to get into these workshops because it is reality. We try and run Latchmere House as a whole, as one would expect the real world to be, and not as in one's imagination sometimes.
At Latchmere House, the commercial venture is seen as a model, and the prison service is considering whether there's scope for more private involvement in prison work. But it's accepted that not every prison is suitable and not everyone's in favour. The Prison Officers Association fears private firms could be looking for cheap labour.
You cannot employ prisoners at the expense of the law-abiding, and I am not prepared to advocate a system which could potentially see law-abiding citizens being placed on the dole queue, unable to pay their mortgages and feed their families, at the expense of prisoners being employed inside British jails.
But the days of sewing sacks and mailbags are numbered, and despite opposition, commercialism is booming. This fashion show at Full Sutton Prison near York launched a range of clothes designed by inmates. The prison has its own trading arm, Keyhole Clothing. It's so successful the company plans a catalogue and even international marketing of its products. Jane Peel, BBC News.
London's Barbican Centre, famous as the home of the Royal Shakespeare Company, is staging a production of a different kind. It's showing all the carry-on films ever made. The season, called Carry On Up the Barbican, is a tribute to what some film critics hail as classics of British comedy. Duncan Kennedy reports.
We used to know a missionary fellow when we were in the Solomon Islands. You remember, dear?
Oh, yes, a splendid man. He went down very well with the natives.
Did he? Yeah, they had him.
It may not win an Oscar, but it's hard not to raise a smile. Only in a carry-on film could the 3rd Foot and Mouth Regiment come up against the forces of the Qazi of Calabar. For the first time, all 30 films are to be shown again in a major retrospective at London's Barbican's Arts Centre. Confirmation, say critics, that they've now reached cult status.
It does show us, not to put too serious or solemn a gloss on it, how our attitude to things sexual and bodily has changed over the years. And they do encompass quite a lot of social history when you look at them, and also they have a huge tableau, almost going to say a sort of bed panorama, of the great comic talents.
Yes? The first Carry On was made in 1958, and although the quality has varied, the films have produced some classic comedy lines.
Infamy! Infamy! They've all got it in for me!
The film's only ever had 3 scriptwriters and 1 producer. He says he doesn't want to know why they've been so successful.
I did an interview with the BBC once when the man said, what is the secret of the success of the carry-ons? I said, I've no idea, and that was the end of the interview. And I have no idea. I don't want to know. I don't drive the car with the bonnet up.
Now really, let's see those chests come out.
Most of the films were a repeat of the saucy seaside postcard formula, one that kept the cast together.
Matron, take them away.
You had a team of the most professional comedians, I think, in the world, with Sid James, Charlie Hawtrey, Kenneth Williams, the whole works, Peter Butterworth, Hattie Jakes, Joan Sims, Barbara Windsor. Magic. And I think, being the most unselfish comedian and comedians, which they were, they all just did that.
In the 1970s, filmgoers started to find them too tame, and their popularity waned. Now, though, their appeal has come full circle, with audiences carrying on laughing all over again.
Of course, they're all raving mad, you know.
Duncan Kennedy, BBC News.
We better carry on. The Scottish Rugby Union is to tell the International Rugby Board that it's in favour of players turning professional. The union said there's a clear desire to move towards a game where players are paid. It'll make its recommendations at a meeting of the board in Paris next month. It wants to see the changes implemented as soon as possible. The Manchester United footballer Eric Cantona says he wants to leave the club and play abroad. The club has turned down his request, but it concedes that he's unhappy at criticism over his appearance in a pre-season friendly game, an appearance which, it was claimed, breached the ban imposed on Cantona for attacking a fan last season.
Eric Cantona has been reporting regularly at Manchester United for training, an activity permitted under the terms of the FA's ban imposed until the end of September. But last month, a national newspaper printed pictures suggesting that he'd contravened the 7-month sanction by actually playing in a match against Rochdale. This attracted the attention of the Football Association, which first investigated the matter and then late this afternoon decided that the match had been an informal training event and thus cleared the club and the player of any infringement. But by then it seems the damage had already been done, and the player who in April said he was staying at Old Trafford because
Manchester United is the biggest club in England and maybe in Europe,
has now requested a transfer, subsequently refused by the United board. But now the cat is out of the bag. Cantona's desire to stay in a country where he feels at best under intense media pressure, at worst the object of open public hostility, has always been suspect, and now his exceptional talent is well and truly back in the European shop window. Inter Milan may well resume their previous interest, which manager Alex Ferguson will resent, but may find irresistible. And so United's close season turmoil continues as the stars vote with their feet. Paul Ince has gone to Italy. Mark Hughes is now at Chelsea, and in a deal still under dispute, Andrei Kanchelskis wants to go to Everton. There's no permanence in football, of course, but the suspicion must be that this one infamous moment at Crystal Palace last season cost United more than just one mercurial player, but perhaps also the very stability of one of the club's greatest ever teams. Rob Bonnet, BBC News.
And that's it from the newsroom. Good night.
Hello, good evening. Now the main stories from Look North. Large parts of Yorkshire look certain to become Britain's first official drought zone. It's emerged that if Yorkshire Water get their way, they intend to apply for legal power to set up standpipes and cut off domestic supplies.
Monitoring at Yorkshire Water headquarters in Leeds shows reserves dangerously low. It wants to immediately step up its hosepipe ban in the worst drought crisis areas of Bradford, Halifax, Huddersfield and Wakefield. Then, by the end of the month, cut home supplies in those areas and install standpipes.
In 1976 we had standpipes up, but fortunately it rained just before we had to actually use them. We're in that situation, possibly worse now, and I hope that our customers will all be able to understand that.
There's clearly mismanagement. Yes, it's a hot summer, but yes, every day 100 million gallons of Yorkshire water, it leaks through their pipes.
The National Rivers Authority is also concerned at another proposed measure to top up West Yorkshire's dwindling supplies, taking increased amounts from the River Wharfe.
The drought's causing other problems too. The heat has been so intense that this year's hay crop has been very thin, pushing the price to its highest for over 15 years.
So little grass is growing on this Elvington farm, carrots are on the menu instead. Hay, the usual summer diet, is twice its normal price, and the drought means this farmer's only harvested one crop, not the usual two.
It's very much browner than it normally is. It should be a rich emerald green. Instead of it's more of a beigey brown colour, and it really is heartbreaking for us to see our productive pastures producing so little.
Are you ready, Carly? Off you go.
Riding schools are suffering too. The 50 ponies here eat 3 nets of hay a day. The price increases will push the food bill up by thousands of pounds over the year. Heavy rain now would be too late for another hay crop, so prices may continue to rise well into next spring.
And finally, a Doncaster couple cut short their first holiday in 7 years today to collect their national lottery winnings. For Mark and Rachel Lund, the cheque for £5 million is a lifeline.
It's the champagne lifestyle for Mark and Rachel Lund from now on. With £5,128,025 in the bank, they can afford a few changes.
We want to buy our own house now and live together and
start our life together, really, you know.
What sort of house are you looking for, Rachel? Bigger.
This is the house Mark shared with his father in order to take an £84 a week job. Rachel and their 3 children lived elsewhere. The couple plan a holiday first, though, somewhere more exotic than Skegness, where they discovered they'd hit the jackpot.
And that's it from us this evening. We're back again tomorrow morning with bulletins starting at 6:25, if you can join us then. Good night. Next, the weather with Michael Fish.
Good evening to you. High pressure still well and truly in command, so no sign of any rain in the days ahead. Now, there will be a subtle change, though. The high pressure will slip a little bit further away eastwards as time goes on. At the moment, with the high where it is, we have quite a chilly northeasterly breeze across the southeastern corner of the country, but those winds turn back to the east and then the southeast, so that eventually we are going to pull some warmer weather in from the continent. It was all right, cooler today, but by tomorrow it'll already be warming up, then even warmer come Thursday and Friday, and at the end of the week quite hot, especially across the southern part of the country. Now today again we had that troublesome area of cloud across eastern parts of the country. It did break eventually for most parts by the end of the day to give some late sunshine, but I think it will be feeding down across that southeastern corner as the night goes on. It'll hold the temperatures up in other parts of the country. It's going to be a jolly chilly night actually, with the temperatures down to as low as 4 or 5 degrees. Tomorrow perhaps a bit on the grey side in some of these southeastern and eastern parts. Sun coming through, though, more readily than of late, and I think most places will enjoy a dry day tomorrow, if enjoy is the worst word for it really, with a good deal of sunshine. If the cloud hangs on at all, it's more likely to be in parts of northeast England, Humberside, Yorkshire and down towards the Wash, as well as in the Northern Isles of Scotland. A little bit warmer tomorrow, temperatures about a couple of degrees up on today, so a fairly warm afternoon just about everywhere, and those winds lighter as well. On the continent, there's been a lot of thunderstorms today through France, some of them giving about 4 inches of rain in a very short time. The thunderstorms by tomorrow will have rumbled on a little bit further eastward, so fine weather in the north and fine weather over much of the Mediterranean. And indeed, as I said at the beginning, the theme for the British Isles for the following few days is more fine weather. In fact, the temperatures will continue to slowly climb. So tomorrow a couple of degrees up on today, come Thursday a couple more degrees on those temperatures. Cooler around the coast and just about the whole country staying dry with a good deal of sunshine. By Friday, a little bit of cloud in northwestern parts, chance of 1 or 2 thundery showers breaking out over Ireland and in the West Country. A good evening to you.
On You Decide tonight,
should we be forced to use our cars less? Most of us want fewer cars on the road, but are we really prepared to give them up? That's this week's debate, and Jeremy Paxman wants your decision.
so if you want to vote yes, phone now on 0891 44 7701. If you want to vote no, phone 0891 44 7702. Lines are open now and for the next 15 minutes. Find out the result tonight when You Decide.
Clockwork Radio, a vital new invention.